I'm truly honored to be unveiling this book for the first time in a room of librarians. This book is true. It all began by accident in a library, so I blame you all for all of it. I'm going to tell that story again. And a number of years ago, I lived in London, and it was a time in my life where I was grappling with my Jewish identity, personally looking for inspiration, looking for a hero. So I decided to write a piece about strong Jewish women. The first one to come to mind, as I studied in 5th grade, Hannah Senish. She was a young World War II resistance paratrooper who was caught, but looked the Nazis in the eye as they shot her. She was the symbol of courage, the only such woman I'd ever heard of. But I kept wondering, who was she really? So I went to the library, in this case, the British Library, and I looked her up in the catalog and ordered the few books listed under her name. I picked up my stack and noticed that the book on the bottom was very unusual. It was small and hard-backed and bound in like a blue fabric with yellowing deckled edges and that musty wooden smell. I opened it and I found inside 200 sheets of tiny script in Yiddish. But even more unusual, I happen to speak Yiddish. The title of the book was Frauen in the Ghettos, Women in the Ghettos. I flipped through the pages looking for this Hannah Senish, but she was only in the last 10. In front of her, there were 190 pages about and by dozens of young Jewish women who defied the Nazis. I was astonished. This was not a book of hagiographic mourning or Talmudic discussions of female valor. This was a Yiddish thriller. These ghetto girls paid off Gestapo guards. They hid revolvers in teddy bears and helped build systems of underground bunkers. They flirted with Nazis, bought them off with wine, whiskey, and pastry, and shot and killed them. They carried out espionage missions for the Red Army. They distributed underground bulletins, and they were bearers of the truth about what was happening to the Jews. They helped the sick and taught the children. They flung Molotov cocktails and bombed German train lines. They tricked the Gestapo into carrying their luggage filled with contraband. They organized thousands of soup kitchens, as well as a militant group of anti-Nazi Nazis. They even created networks to smuggle and save Jewish books, and planned a cataloged system of underground libraries. Into the crisp silence of the British Library Humanities 1 reading room, I wanted to yelp. I knew I had found a treasure. But I was also baffled. Who were these women? What made them act as they did? Were there more? What else had they done to defy Hitler's terrorizing regime? Aside from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which I had heard of, what was the story of Jewish resistance in World War II? In fact, what really happened in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising? I didn't know. What happened to these female fighters who survived? How did they live the rest of their lives? Where were they? And why had I, who had grown up in a Holocaust survivor family and community, who'd written for countless Jewish publications, who had a PhD in women's history, never heard this story? And so began my quest, a dozen years of translation and research in Poland, Israel, across North America, England, in archives and living rooms, memorial monuments, and the animated streets of former ghettos. I trawled through testimonies, photographs, obscure Hebrew documentaries, small press published accounts, museum displays, and the towns where these women were born and raised. The Jewish resistance did not beat the Nazis, nor was that ever their goal, but I was astonished to learn of the scope of the underground. Over 90 European ghettos had armed Jewish resistance units. 30,000 Jews enlisted in the partisans. Rescue networks supported 12,000 Jews in hiding in Warsaw alone. All this alongside daily acts of resilience, smuggling food, friendship, art, even humor. Women were at the helm of so many of these efforts. Women, in my book, were mostly aged 16 to 25. Mirgola Tosha Altman, Gustav Davidson, Rushka Koksak, Masha Fittermilch, Fromke Plotnitsky. There were hundreds of them, maybe even thousands of them, none of which, by the way, I ever would have been able to find without the tireless teams of librarians who helped me look up these Slavic and Yiddish names and words in English search engines. At the center of Freuen was a testimonial by a woman named Renia. I was immediately struck by her prose, comprised at the end of the war when she was just 20 years old. Her writing was descriptive, down to earth, even witty. For security reasons, she didn't even publish her last name, but I managed to find her files and her family and fill out her story. Renia was brought up in 1930s Poland. In a world of high-class Yiddish theater, 180 Jewish newspapers, cafes, tango, jazz, and youth movements that trained young Jewish men and women to feel pride, to live collectively, to be agent and physically active, to question, to critique, and to plan. After Hitler took over Renia's town and locked her and her family in a ghetto, Renia escaped and fled alone through fields, jumping off moving trains, hiding in cupboards, bargaining with police, pretending to be Catholic and getting a job as a maid, nervously genuflecting at weekly church services. She fled again to join her older sister in the town of Begin. Pre-war, Begin had been a largely middle-class, sophisticated Jewish community that now hosted a burgeoning cell of youth rebellion. There, Renia became what is called a courier girl. Courier girls connected the locked ghettos where the Jews were imprisoned. Being caught on the outside, on the Aryan side, meant certain death. But despite that, these girls dyed their hair blonde, took off their armbands, put on dazzling fake smiles, and secretly slipped in and out of ghettos, bringing Jews information and hope, bulletins, and false Aryan ID papers. They smuggled pistols, bullets, and grenades, hiding them in marmalade jars, sacks of potatoes, and designer handbags. Women in particular were positioned to do this kind of work. They were not circumcised, and so did not risk being caught in the common pants drop test. Before the war, Jewish sons had been sent to expensive Jewish schools. Girls were sent to Polish public schools. Girls were more acculturated. They spoke Polish without that creaky Jewish accent. They were trained as girls to listen, to be sensitive to others' cues, to be coy and even flirtatious. They were the perfect undercover spies who no one suspected. Renia transported grenades and cash taped to her body, hidden in her undergarments. Zivia was a leader in the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Bella got a job working for the Gestapo as a secretary. She would steal their documents and bring them to Jewish forgers. Vladka helped support Jews in hiding in Aryan Warsaw, secretly bringing them money, medical help, and trusted photographers who could take photographs of them for the fake IDs. Hrushka found a pamphlet about bombs in, of course, the Vilna Library. It became their recipe book. Her comrade, Vika, put a rudimentary explosive under her coat, slipped out of the ghetto, went to town, and blew up the city's electrical supply. Zelda did 17 trips, transporting hundreds of Jews out of ghettos and slave labor camps. 19-year-old photographer Faye joined the partisans, participated in combat missions, and performed forced surgeries. She snipped off soldiers' bones with her teeth. Little Wanda with the braids, that was a Gestapo nickname. She was wanted by the Gestapo because she'd make pretty, walk into a Nazi office, and shoot him cold in the head. Roja was the head of a secret ring of 30 Jewish women at Auschwitz who stole gunpowder and helped blow up a crematorium. For years, these stories were hidden. Women's narratives were silenced for both political and personal reasons, which differed across communities and countries. Their work was not seen as classically heroic. Many were treated with disbelief. Others were accused by relatives of having fled instead of staying to look after their parents. Still others were charged with sleeping their way to safety. Sometimes family members silenced them as they feared that opening up old wounds would tear them apart. Many of my characters hushed their tales due to an oppressive survivor's guilt. They felt that compared to others who'd been in camps, they'd had it not so bad. Why should they complain? So often, when their vulnerable outpourings were not received with empathy, women turned inward and repressed their experiences. And then there was coping. Women kept their past secret out of a desperate desire to create a normal life for their children and for themselves. They did not want to be professional survivors. Like so many refugees, they wanted to conceal their past and start afresh, to blend into their new worlds and be reborn. Their formidable tales were buried with their traumas, but both stayed close to the surface, waiting to burst out. Right now, we are living through a cultural moment where women are harnessing their power, witnessing social regression and epidemic of harassment, fearing that our civil liberties, our constitutional backbone, and even the notion of authenticity are at stake. Women are mounting large-scale social resistance efforts and political disruptions. The young female activists of today spring from a hidden heritage of female bravado, and The Light of Days tells this story of women who saw the truth of their time, acknowledged it, worked together, and risked their lives in the fight for justice and liberty. This is a tale of extraordinary female agency against all odds, and reminds us of the importance of recognizing the control we have over our own lives. The Ghetto Girls took responsibility and action, even in the face of this seemingly impossible goal. Small victories are achievable. The famous Warsaw Ghetto chronicler and archivist, Emanuel Ringelblum, wrote of the Courier Girls at the time, "Nothing stands in their way. How many times have they looked death in the eyes? The story of the Jewish woman will be a glorious page in the history of Jewry during the present war." Tomorrow, Monday, on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we'll be commemorating 75 years since the end of the war. And I am so honored to finally unveil this glorious page, this ultimate inspiration.